podcast. I'm your host, James Sunstow, and today we've got a very special guest. He's a five-time world champion, NWA champion, and he's England's own national treasure, Nick Aldis. How are you doing, Nick?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Like I said, I've mentioned before, been a fan of your work for a while, so for you to come onto the show, it's been great. During the same week, I've interviewed Thunder Rosa and also NWA legend Nikita Koloff, so you've just rounded it off for me perfectly.
Oh, awesome! They're two very good people to interview. I mean, Rosa. I mean, I had this conversation with someone the other day where I think I would, out of everyone, who's been involved with the NWA, I think as far as a talent who has sort of really gone above and beyond to represent the brand, on every level. I think it's after myself, without patting myself on the back too hard, Barry Horowitz style, I would say, Rosa's probably the next one. She's been a phenomenal talent, but she goes out of her way to represent the brand and the fans and to interact, and that's she takes her role as champion seriously, as did Allison Kay. Those two, those two both. That Allison set the standard really high at the beginning, and and I think we both did. AK and I had conversations early on, and same with Rosa and I, where we just sort of understand that if we're gonna get this company over and get this brand over, we as the champions have to do what we think champions should do, which is carry yourselves in a way that represents the brand. It's not just hey, look at me, I'm a champion. It's you sort of it's a full-time job.
Yeah, it is, and you've been doing a great work of it. And I know I think one of the biggest influences on you the last couple of years before he sadly passed away was Harley Race. I know towards the end of his life you became really good friends with him, and I'm guessing, like, obviously you've got your own style on being a champion, but I would imagine he was a big influence on how to carry yourself as a champion and carry the brand.
Absolutely. Harley, you was someone who, early in my career, I would hear the name. I would hear I'm not ashamed to say this, even though it'll, sometimes it gets sort of clickbait and stuff. But when I was first sort of breaking in, one of the guys I really sort of looked up to and idolized was Triple H. And when I watched a lot of Hunter's stuff, I would always hear, oh, shades of Harley Race. He reminds me of Harley Race. He's like Harley Race. So I remember thinking, oh, well, because obviously growing up in England, I was born in '86. The NWA and especially the previous incarnations of it, and then even WCW. It was quite a while before WCW really got a strong TV presence in the UK.
Yeah,
and I want to say it was like mid '96 before they really got a significant TV presence even, so I'd heard of them, but, as a kid, I just kind of, for me, it was like the WWF was wrestling, I vaguely knew because of my parents, I sort of knew that there was this other British wrestling back in the day, had no idea how big it was, and so for me, it was sort of like, this was this whole new world opening up to me. So then, as I became a student of the game, around the sort of early 2000s, and just started really locking in on this idea that this was what I wanted to do as a career, not just be a fan. I just started studying and finding, either still, I mean, even I'm aging myself here, but even it's still a little early days of tape trading. I was still just, I was in the last dying tape trading, and then obviously when everything started going online, it was great because I had all this, easy resources. But yeah, I started finding stuff on Harley and sort of started looking, because my first exposure to Harley was as Vader's manager.
Oh yeah.
So I just was like, oh yeah, he's like, I knew he was like some old wrestler that people really admired and respected. But a thing, and I did the same thing that a lot of people do with Harley, where they get swept up in this thing. Oh, he was tough. He was this tough guy. He's this legendary tough guy. Because those are the stories that people love to tell about Harley, and they're all, with good reason. He was a man's man, and that's an understatement. But when I really started going back and watching him, I started realizing, man, this guy was so ahead of his time. just really got it, really understood how to take the audience on a ride, and understood the role of being a champion. Like there are certain people that you look at them and you go, okay, that's a top guy. He's the guy. But that doesn't necessarily always mean that they're also really well suited to being a world champion. Like there are certain guys, who, like, I wouldn't consider myself to be someone who people look at and think, oh yeah, that's like the guy. That's like the guy that's like, like he's the biggest star. Like I've never, obviously everyone wants to be that, but I've always understood that I'm better suited to being the perennial champion.
Yeah.
Like I'm better at being the adversary to that real special guy when that special guy shows his face. Because the thing with wrestling is that you're creating Rocky. You want Rocky Balboa. You want to follow someone's journey all the way to the insurmountable odds of facing the world champion. And the world champion needs to be Apollo Creed. He's the guy who, like, you can see every single bit of him. You can go, he is the man. Like, there's no doubt about it. But you want the other guy to win. Like deep down, you want Rocky to win, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, Rocky's way better. You don't necessarily think that, but it's like there's just something about him that makes you really want him to win. Yeah. I'm Apollo Creed. I'm good at being Apollo Creed.
Yeah, definitely.
Harley was good at being Apollo Creed. Flair was great at being Apollo Creed. Hunter is great at being Apollo Creed.
Yeah.
Hunter made a career out of being the Apollo Creed to Rock's Rocky, to Austin's Rocky, like, because he understood that it's here's a gaming reference. Here's a way to simplify it. The world champion needs to be like the final boss.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the way I've always looked at it, and that's the way I've always tried to portray myself. Is like, you got to get through me to be solidified as the best. And that's how I believe that to be true with the NWA, and you have to believe it, and that's what Harley did. But that's a long way. I've gone the long way around. But the thing with Harley was that, if you look beyond just these sort of legendary stories of him being this tough guy, and he drank beer, and he drank whiskey and punched people and got into fights and never backed down from anyone. He's also an incredibly gifted storyteller and very generous. You go back and watch like Harley and like Jerry Lawler and guys like that. He would make his opponent look like Superman, and the fact that he had done all the work prior to getting in the ring to make himself credible meant that now he could bestow that credibility on someone else. And that's the principle that I've tried to take on.
Yeah, and you've explained it pretty damn well. Like I said, you are definitely the Apollo Creed of NWA, and it's the perfect role for you, I personally think. And not only you're making yourself a bigger brand, you also help building the NWA, which is the right it should be. But before we get back to Power, I'd like to talk about your training. I've seen some interviews you've done, so for the benefit of my listeners, your training, obviously I know you was raised up around Norfolk and stuff, which I've literally just moved down to Somerset, but I was from Lincolnshire, so I was like, oh, he's literally like 60 miles from me. And you got training with the Knight family, was that right?
Yep. Started with the Knights because I was born in Kings Lynn, raised in West Norfolk. As I went to high school in a little town called Hunstanton, which is right across the water from Skegness.
That's it.
And Skegness, probably, I mean, it'd be hard. I don't know, maybe with Atlanta now, I don't know, but Skegness might hold the record for the place I've wrestled the most in my life. But and everything. But it's so and it was just one of those. Again, not really understanding that the business that deeply when I was a kid. I didn't, I knew that like independent shows would come to my hometown every now and then, like, but a lot of the time they were like the sort of tribute shows where they would have like someone dressed up as Mankind or whatever. So it's like you don't you know, when you're a kid, you just sort of go to this and just sort of enjoy it. You don't sort of think to yourself, I wonder if these guys are like full-time pro wrestlers. You know, you don't like Blondie Barrett was on that show and some other really good workers. But but at the time, as a kid, you're just like, oh, I haven't seen them on TV, so I don't know who they are. And you don't think to yourself, oh, I wonder if they go all over the country doing this, which they did.
Yeah.
But when I started sort of thinking about, okay, how do I train to be a wrestler? You know, how do I go to wrestling school and do this? I started looking for places in America. You know, I started looking at all these different schools, you know, and thinking, okay, well, I'll save up my money and I'll go and, you know, whatever. And I mean, I did end up doing that later, but I saved up money from wrestling to go and continue my education with Harley. But then I started realizing, oh, there are wrestling schools here. And I found like Hammerlock was really well promoted at the time. So I was sort of looking at Hammerlock and they would do these camps. And I remember like emailing back and forth with Andre Baker about it. And then one of my friends who decided he wanted to try to get into wrestling too, he was like, mate, there's a school in Norwich. It was just, we couldn't believe it. We were just like, yes, like this is great, you know, like, and we went there and just they would do, you know, they were doing the holiday camps. So like they didn't have a full-time school at the time. They would just sort of run weekend training camps sort of whenever they had a free weekend. Yeah. So of course we signed up to, you know, all of them. And they're old school. This is broke you in the old-fashioned way. I personally am good with that. I think that's the right way to do it. I was, you know, I puked a couple of times on the first day, and you know, had a lot of bruises. But that's the business. You know, it's a hard business, and you have to appreciate that to understand what people go through, you know, to earn their place in it. So I sort of got that from the beginning. And while they never, you know, the Knights don't mince words, they're not going to tell you what you hear. They did, you know, pretty early on. I sort of realized, again, this is not me sort of putting myself over too much, but I remember thinking pretty early on in that camp, like, I'm one of the best guys here. Like, I'm one of the best athletes here. Like, I can pick this up. And I could tell that Julia and Ricky saw that I could be something, you know, and you know, both of them have been obviously very, very kind, you know, about me in later years, and they've said things to the effect of, we knew he was going to be something. You know, I don't know if I wasn't 100% sure I felt that at the time, but see, again, that's good too, because had they been to, I've seen guys who had tons of potential, but because everyone else thought the same thing, they treated them differently, and then they didn't last because they started to become entitled. And so I think that Ricky and Julia worked really hard to make sure that I never felt that way. You know, I think they would treat us all the same, but then when it came to like who was booked on the show, they'd be like, "You're booked," you know. And that was kind of the way Harley was too. When I went to Harley's camp, like I remember they had Mike Rotunda come and, you know, scout everyone on one of the days, and that was the first, after, you know, I'd been there 2 or 3 days, and that was the first sort of indication that Harley thought that I had something, because Harley pulled me aside and said, when Mike Rotunda comes, you know, you walk right up to him and you shake his hand, you look him in the eye, you know, and you do this, and you know, he started kind of coaching me on like how to, you know, and I started realizing, okay, like he, you know, you just get these little moments where you think, okay, like I think that they see something. And you know, there was a few of us at that. So Dexter Loomis was at that camp. Sam Shaw, me and him have been best friends ever since. Joe Hennig was at that camp. You know, and so it was, you know, it's interesting to see, you know, where some of us have sort of gone on from there. But no, the breaking in, and I've said this a few times in different interviews, but when I was breaking in England, we all thought that we were at this huge disadvantage, you know, breaking in England, thinking, oh, we're not American, you know, no one's going to want us, put us on TV. I can't speak with an American. I remember thinking, like, I wonder if I could fake an American accent to pretend to be American, and stuff like that, to get on TV. All the while not realizing that we had a tremendous advantage over American wrestlers at that point in time in the early 2000s, because we still had a thriving wrestling scene where we could wrestle every day, pretty much. My first full-time year in wrestling, I wrestled like 6 days a week most of the year. Wow. Like with the Butlins, because of the Butlins, because I got on with Dixon, because I got on the All-Star circuit. So you'd start on a Tuesday at Skegness, and then you would do Skegness, Bognor, Minehead, and then back around, and like back to Bognor, then Minehead, then Skegness, and then Mondays off. And sometimes there was extra camps in I can't remember the name of it now, Southsea, I think, or something. But there was you could at the time you're not even thinking about it. You're just thinking like, I was just in my mind I was just like, I'm trying to get better, and I'm trying to be a wrestler, and I'm like, this is great. And I'm wrestling in front of good crowds and stuff. But it wasn't until much later that I really appreciated, like, man, what a great opportunity, because that's how you learn the business is reps in front of a crowd, and that's how I was able to get the Gladiators gig, and that's how I was able to get along quickly, because I got so comfortable in front of an audience. Now my work wasn't great, like my work in the ring took time to get better, but I was so comfortable in my own skin. So that was the thing that sort of stood out, compared to a lot of other people my age, because they were kind of like, that was the thing that the producers at Gladiators told me. They were like, you're just so comfortable in front of an audience, and it's because I was, every day we would wrestle, sometimes twice. So it was just like, it became second nature.
That's good to explain. Speaking of Gladiators, I've always thought, like, obviously you was in the reboot back in 2008, I think it was, 07, 08. And to me, like, obviously you would have watched the original run as a child yourself, I would imagine, and Wolf was there, Warrior, Hunter. And I've always thought in my head, like, Gladiators is the closest thing to professional wrestling without wrestling being involved, because it's weird. It was a game show. You had your characters, you had your heels and your faces. I'm going to have to ask you what the Wolf was like, because the Wolf, he's one person who could have been in the wrestling world, and he never did. What was he like behind the scenes?
Mike he's a great guy. I got on great with him. Like, I think I don't want to speak out of school, but I think that he had perhaps sort of flirted with being a wrestler back at one point in time. Or, I mean, he was certainly a fan. Like, he was certainly influenced by pro wrestling, which you'll find with that. You find that with a lot of people who have gone on to have sort of successful characters in other sort of sports or forms of entertainment, like Ali or Conor McGregor, people like that, where they're influenced by pro wrestling. But Mike, I mean, when I met, obviously at that point, by the time I met him, he had already sort of heard about me, and kind of, there was the obvious comparisons had been made. He was never sort of territorial about it or anything like that. And he was never, John Anderson was the referee. He was the biggest prima donna I ever worked with.
Really?
Terrible. He locked himself in his dressing room and wouldn't come out because he was upset, that me and Ian Wright did a spot on one of the events and didn't tell him about it. And we were just like, you kidding me? You're the referee. Anyway, no, but Mike was cool, and I remember then doing that show. I was 21 when I did that show. But at that point I'd studied the business, and the head of the network, the head of Sky One at the time, a guy called Richard Wolf, who was a great guy. He had studied a lot of American television, because you have to remember, this was around the time where 24 Lost, and all these huge sort of, it was kind of the dawn of the era of the high budget TV dramas kind of taking over from movies almost, where it started becoming this thing of big time actors were kind of looking to do these series, these long season shows now, you know,
Yeah.
and then obviously when Netflix came into play and stuff like that, now it's solidified. But I think that, you know, the sort of the early days of that were kind of lost in 24 and stuff like that. But Richard had, you know, he would go to America a lot to study sort of what was working on television there. And he, you know, so he understood wrestling. He understood pro wrestling because because obviously he would see he would always study all the ratings and stuff. And he would, you know, he ever say to me, he said, well, yeah, wrestling's been a consistently top performing, you know, television thing in the US for decades. So he sort of understood. And I remember having a conversation with him. I said, you realize that what we're doing here is actually a better definition of sports entertainment than wrestling, because Gladiators there was a sport element to it. The game, the results were not predetermined. You know what I mean? Like, it was never, certainly what I mean, at least nothing I was involved in. I obviously can't speak for everyone, but no one ever told me, okay, let him win, you know, or hey, you know, whatever. So it was a legitimate contest. They were just events designed to be larger than life and entertaining and exciting. So really it was sports entertainment, you know, because all sports is sports entertainment, is my argument. Because if it wasn't, then why do we have big stadiums? And, you know, why do we have sponsors? Why do we have so much money? You know, why do footballers make, you know, 300 grand a week? Like, it's entertainment.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? And the ones that stand out, you know, Eric Cantona, you know, all the way back, like, they're the characters. So, you know, what Mike and I sort of bonded on that because he understood that I understood the principle right away. And he also understood that I was sort of doing it my own way, because Mike didn't really cut promos as Wolf. You know, his was more sort of cheating and like pushing someone over and sort of like geeing up the crowd and stuff and just sort of doing more traditional heel heat stuff. Whereas mine was like almost all based on my promos. Like, people would sit there going, I can't wait to hear what he has to say, you know, which is such a cool feeling. Like, when you think that, you know, one of the things that always gets thrown about with wrestling, oh, there's too many promos, there's too much talking and not enough. But it's like, promos is what makes people, that's what gets you over, you know, it's what makes people really care about you. It's like hearing what you have to say. So I just developed a sort of a niche for myself very quickly, where that became my thing. Was like, man, I don't even really, and it put me in a good spot because it didn't really matter if I won or lost, you know. It didn't really matter if I won, then I could gloat and be like, you know, a dick about it, and if I lost, I could complain and, you know, make up some excuse and stuff. And either way, it was like great TV. So that, you know, it put me in a good spot.
Cool. And not long after this, you went straight to TNA, and I know they gave you the gimmick. I suppose they was trying to go off your Gladiators run, like Brutus Magnus, which I didn't like it. I kept having flashbacks to Farouk Ron Simmons when he first came into World Wrestling Federation. Thankfully, Douglas Williams came along and Rob Terry and the British Invasion was born. And I obviously, being British, being English, I was being biased because every time I see an English wrestler or in Rob's case, he's Welsh but British. Every time I saw, you know, the homegrown lads make success, I would always support them. So what was it like being able to team up with Williams and Terry? Because I know that Williams was an influence on you as well because he was really successful in Japan.
Sure. Doug was someone who a lot of us had looked up to at that point, because, you know, by the time I was sort of working full time on the scene and you know, doing Gladiators and whatever, I understood the scene better. I understood the business better. And one of the things I sort of understood was that WWE has Regal on the main roster, and I think at that point they had maybe Steve Lewington, Burchill, you know, maybe one or two other British guys, and they were all in OVW or Deep South or whatever their developmental was at that time. And they, you know, Steve Lewington, you know, they sort of gave him half a chance. Nothing really happened. No. Burchill, they sort of again tried to do something with him with Dave Taylor, you know,
and the pirate gimmick as well.
And a lot of us, I think we started looking at it and sort of understanding that the odds are not really in our favor, you know, as far as sort of, British wrestlers, but it didn't deter us. You know, it wasn't, you know, I've had this conversation with Marty a few times and Stu, you know, Drew, all of us, like, you know, the one thing we all had in common was that even though we understood this, none of us went, oh, okay, well, why even bother then? There's no point trying. You know, we just all realized that we had to sort of, we had to look at it like a business. We had to carve out, you know, we had to understand that while it would be great if that can happen, you know, we have to be able to control our own destiny, you know, as a performer. And that's where Doug was such a role model to us, because it was like, wow, Doug's going all over the world. He goes to Ring of Honor for a little while, then he goes to Germany, and he's huge in Germany, and then he goes to Japan in Noah, and he's one of the top gaijin in Noah. And so it was kind of like, wow, he's really doing it, you know, and he's doing it his own way, like, and he was respected. You know, everyone in the business, you know, you mentioned Doug Williams, and they'd be like, oh, he's great. Yeah, Doug Williams, great work. So it was like he had this like, sort of aura and this level of respect about him. And so, you know, and he'd already helped me out prior to Gladiators, prior to TNA. You know, he had come to help train at Dropkicks and help get me booked. He'd called a few promoters and said, hey, there's this kid at Dropkicks you ought to book, you know. So he'd wrestled me, you know, help. You know, he'd go, hey, you should book him, and you should book him with me. Like, I can get a good match, you know, like, I'll show you. So, I mean, I already owed a debt of gratitude to Doug.
Yeah.
When Terry Taylor told me, we're dropping the Gladiator thing, you're going to go into tag team with Doug Williams, and we're going to put Rob Terry as your bodyguard, I just remember just thinking, like, thank God.
Yes.
Like, you know, I was naive, but I wasn't that naive. I knew that this thing wasn't going to work. And I knew that if something didn't turn around soon, I was probably going to get fired, you know?
Yeah.
So I was kind of like, okay, when he told me that, I just went, phew, because I also, as well, TNA doesn't get enough credit for this, but, you know, at that point, 2009, they had a great tag team division.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like Machine Guns, Beer Money, 3D, Booker and Scott, you know, and they're all like, I mean, and there are others, but they were all like, I mean, and then there was Lethal and Creed as well. They were great.
Yeah.
Like, it was like they had all these like kick-ass tag teams, and they're all different. You know, they also had their own unique sort of gimmicks and characters and styles, and like, you know, and I remember just thinking, wow, we'll be great in that, because like I could already see where we slotted in, because it was like they had a lot of babyface tag teams. Machine Gun, Beer Money were the hottest acts in the company, and they were baby faces. 3D were baby faces. You know, Booker and Scott were heels, but they weren't really heels. You know what I mean? Because they were huge stars. Yeah. Because they were big stars. It was kind of like they got huge reactions, so they weren't really heels. No. You know, and then and Creed and Lethal were baby faces too when they were. I think they had finished tagging by the time we got there, but I can't remember. But either way, it was like I just right away went, oh, we'll be the heel team, and Foreign Heat, like the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it was like, I remember thinking the sort of the Union Jack tights and the jacket stuff was a little bit on the nose. And like, I remember thinking like, I would have loved if we could have made it just slightly cool. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also understood that the objective was to have heat. You know, that's the thing. I think a thing that's greatly missing now is that everybody wants to be cool.
Exactly.
Everybody. So you get all these teams, like, especially on like NXT and stuff. You can really see the fashion. There's always like whatever's in and out of fashion with wrestling. And it's like, so, you know, right now the fashion is, oh, I have the simple jacket and the simple trunks and the no knee pads and the boots with the socks. And, you know, in other words, a World of Sport wrestler.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that's fine. But like, how do I determine if I'm supposed to like you or dislike you? How can I, if I've never watched the show before, how am I supposed to be able to look at you and go, I get what this guy is. He's like he's this, he's that. You don't. It's like, he's a nondescript wrestler. And for us, as much as we might have felt a little bit silly, to begin with, like with this sort of blatant in your face, like Union Jack, we're British, thing, it was like we knew that your average, especially in America, your average Joe Blow sitting on the couch, like flicking, deciding whether he's going to watch TNA or NASCAR, turns on and he's like, "Hey, look at these British pricks," like, I hope the Dudley boys kick his ass, like, and it was like, that's kind of what you want. Like, you want to elicit an emotional response. So, and I mean, the reaction was there right from the beginning, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me, because I got this phenomenal education. I got to work with Beer Money all the time. I got to work with the Dudleys all the time. Bully Ray, like, he was a real mentor to me early on, because in between, not only was I working, were Doug and I working with Bubba and Devon, but they were also sending me in between to their training school. So he was he played a big part in helping me keep my job, in the early going, because he knew that they saw something in me, and he knew that I was important to the business, to the company, because the company was doing very well in the UK at that time, and they really wanted a British face. They really wanted like a British guy that they could sort of sink their teeth into and promote and stuff, and luckily that was me. So a lot of people went to work, getting me sort of TV ready, even though I was thrown in at the deep end a little bit, but I have such fond memories of my time as a tag team with Doug. I mean, it was just glorious, just so easy, and not having to sort of worry about. We never worried about like winning or losing, or like every now and then it might say, okay, specifically we need you to pin so and so, or like so and so to get the win. But most of the time we were just kind of like, we knew our role. Like, we just wanted to entertain people and get heat, and as a result, we made more money because we were booked on everything. We were on all the house shows. We were on all the tours, all the international tours. So it was like, for a 22-year-old kid who just needs the reps, needs the exposure, couldn't ask for better. And I was glad for Doug too, because Doug had waited a long time to get a regular like TV gig. Not just a sort of, we're going to book him in this like tournament, or we're going to book him in this, because he'd been signed already, but they just just use him periodically for like X Division tournament, or the World Cup or whatever. And it was like, he finally had a character. He finally had like a storyline and a thing, because they saw him as he's just a serious wrestler type.
Yeah.
If he came along today, it'd be a totally different story.
World champion.
He'd be world champion.
Exactly.
But it's just at that point they were still, the focus was different then. Even 10 years ago, the focus was different.
Yeah. Cool. And around about this time as well, Hulk Hogan came into the mix. Did you have many dealings with him, or what was it like backstage?
I mean, look, Hulk he's a different breed. He's a different level of human being. It's like I'd become good friends with Kevin Nash. Nash was really, I would say, for me, the first like really major star who I sort of developed a sort of what I would call a relationship with, like beyond just a sort of acquaintance, right?
Yeah.
And Kev would just, Kev would sit with me, and I would try to keep up with him, drink for drink, and like we just would just give me great advice. We would just sit there and just pontificate on the business, and he would just. He's a guy who I credit a lot of that to as well, because he would always remind me of like what a good spot I was in. He's like, hey, You're like tag team division's red hot, and you guys are the only heels. You know, like you guys are going to be working. You know, and he'll sort of remind you of all this stuff because you know when you're a kid, you're a bit like, oh, I don't want to lose, or I want to look strong, and blah blah. And Kevin would be like, oh man, this is the business, you know. So, but Kev obviously had a very storied history and relationship with Hulk. So when it was announced that they were coming in, you know, I never forget. Kevin said to me, because I forget how it came up, but we were talking about how like Hogan and Austin were the two kind of biggest babyface, stars of all time, and obviously Rock has transcended the business at this point. But like as far as like within wrestling, Hogan and Austin were, the two kind of just ultimate stars of all time. And Kevin said, here's the difference. He goes, I've walked through the airport with Hulk and I've walked through with Steve Austin. And Kevin said, walking through the airport with Hulk is like walking through the airport with Mickey Mouse. Like everybody, not just like most people. He's like every single person goes, that's Hulk Hogan. Yeah. Like he's a cartoon character come to life. And I remember just being so kind of nervous, and I was probably awkward, and he's probably used to dealing with that all the time as people kind of, but our interactions were fairly limited at first. I was sort of a blip on the radar, at that point. But I remember he found out I lived in Clearwater, which is where he lives. So it's like, hey brother, you live in Clearwater? Oh, that's so great. I love Clearwater, and he was kind of, like, I think he liked that about me, that like, hey, this British kid moved to Clearwater, so that was like a nice little icebreaker. But as far as like sort of nuggets or kind of pearls of wisdom and stuff, I didn't get a lot of that from Hulk until 2013. When I was sort of being positioned for a bit of a shove. And then I remember when I had been off TV for a while, and I made my comeback in Manchester, and the reaction was great. Manchester has always been a good town for me. Yeah, and I remember coming back and Hulk like looking at me and just kind of giving this kind of okay kind of nod, and then I saw him later on, and he said, "Brother, I think you may have got a bigger pop than me." And I just, obviously being kind and everything like that. But it was like, you got a bigger pop than me, and I was just like, wow, like at that point, it was kind of, that's such a confidence booster for anyone in the business, at any level, to sort of get that sort of acknowledgement. It was just kind of, and that's the power of somebody like Hulk, he has that ability to just say one 5-second interaction can just make you just feel like you're like on your way to do something. So very limited, but just amazing to be able to be around him and soak up some of that energy.
Yeah, and you mentioned like you was off TV for a bit, and you made your return at Manchester, and around about this time as well, they decided to put you in the main event, Mafia, along with Sting, Samoa Joe. Was it Kurt Angle? I think was Kurt Angle at the time, and I know they brought in what's the guy called now, the cage fighter, Rampage. That's it. Rampage was like the unofficial member. But what was it like being? I know that it was Sting what recommended you. I think he wanted you in the group. So how did you feel getting that photo confidence from the main man himself?
Well, that I'm glad you asked that, because Sting, I really he needs as big a mention as anybody as far as people that have helped me, because as far back as 2009, just when I was in the British Invasion as a tag team, it was Sting who was going like, I think that kid, we should be making sure we work on that kid. He would always, he was always saying, what have you got for him? What are we doing with him? I'll never forget. Back then they used to send the entire format for the show to everyone. They used to email it to you like the day before or a couple of days before. And I was boarding my flight to go to Orlando, and I got the format. So I'm like sitting on the plane and I'm like reading through it, scrolling through it on my BlackBerry. Again, aging myself.
Yeah.
I remember scrolling through it and then I get to a segment and it says Doug Williams and Rob Terry versus whoever. And I remember thinking, wait, they replaced me with Rob? Like, Rob and Doug is the team now, and I'm like, what am I doing? You know, like, am I off TV? Am I going to be like a manager? Like, I remember just thinking, like, just panicking, you know, typical like wrestling paranoia. Just being like, why are they doing that? You know, like, oh my God, like they've replaced me with Rob. They're going to push Rob instead of me, vote. And then I sat there for a couple of minutes, like just so like deflated. And then, thank God I did this, but I carried on scrolling through. And it just out of curiosity, like I wonder what they're doing on the rest of this show, you know. I get to the end, it says Impact main event, Magnus versus Sting, and wow. I like sit on the plane and go, what what the, you know. And yeah, I mean, and I remember getting to TV and kind of, because I was still super nervous around Steve all the time.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, again, just the best human being you could meet. And again, another guy who right from the beginning was always kind of asking questions and making sure that I, you know, was sort of was on my way, you know. And I remember going up to him and just kind of going, okay, what's up? Like we're wrestling in the main event, like. And I remember saying to him, you'll have to forgive me. I don't know how to approach you on this. You know, like, this is the same as like, oh, hey, what do you want? You know, I was kind of like, how do you want to do this? He's like, let's go sit down. We go sit down. And he just goes, I just want you to know something. He's like, I requested this. You know, he said, I wanted this match. Like, I wanted to work with you so that, you know, they can see that, like, you're someone they should be building around. And I just kind of went, like, wow, why? And he was just like, well, you know, you're young, you've got the look, you've got the right attitude, you're intelligent, you know. He's like, you remind me of me. And I was just kind of like, wait, what is happening? Wow. You know, like, like 22. And he starts telling me about like having his first match in 1986 and this and that. And he stops and he goes, you were born in 1986, weren't you? And I was like, yeah. And he's just like, oh my God, you know, and we're like laughing about it. But he goes, no, he's like, I just got a good feeling about you. And I wanted to work with you because, like, I think he saw me as a somewhat of a traditionalist. Like, yeah. He saw me as a guy who understood, like, because again, and this isn't a knock on anyone else on the roster at that point, but you know, the business had changed. There wasn't a lot of space for guys who were sort of generous and, you know, selling for other people and making other people look good. That wasn't valued the same way that it used to be. You know, now it was kind of like, well, what cool moves do you do? You know, what high spots do you do? Everyone was getting their shit in left and right, whether they were heel or babyface. And I think Steve sort of saw me as this guy, and he, you know, this guy looks like that, but he's just like bumping and feeding for everyone and like selling all the time and like, you know, sets up the baby face to sort of to look strong and be, you know, and sort of gets the audience like ready, you know, really ready to see him get his ass kicked.
Yeah,
that's pretty much what he said. He was like, you remind me of the guys that I sort of came up working against. Yeah. Like you, and I, you know, and he knew, and obviously he respected Regal and a lot of the other Brits, so he sort of understood that we still, you know, we all knew how to sort of wrestle to an extent and could sort of, you know, could handle ourselves and whatever. And I think just the whole thing just to him was just like, that's the kind of guy I want to work with. And we did. And that's how I kind of ended up getting in with Kevin too, because after I had that match with Sting, I think a lot of the guys at that point, because I was super green, yeah, and everyone knew like, oh, this is Dixie's guy, the big, you know, big push, like, you know, whatever. So it was, you know, I think it was a curtain sellout. You know, I think it was sold out at the Monitor. So I think all these people were like, oh my God, let's see this kid like shit the bed with Sting, and this will be hilarious, terrible, blah blah blah. And then I just went out and just had a traditional, like just a typical Sting match. You know, I mean, I basically played the role of Flair, you know, very poorly. You know, I just took his, hit him, no sell, you know, go for something. He gives me the big hip lock out of the corner, drop kick, I powder, you know, Sting, I do my little thing. Then Sting does the howl and I like bag off, you know, I just did everything, you know, and then finally just did a nice little finish, you know, set him up for something, come off the top. He catches me out the air, puts me in the scorpion, I tap, and it goes, you know, and it was just gave the people what they wanted, right?
Yeah.
Boo this, oh, boo, he's from another country, boo, oh, it's Sting, a giant star, like, oh, this guy's cheating, you know, this guy, you know, and then like, yay, Sting's kicking his ass, yay, Sting won with his finish, and like, you know, a huge, you know, got a great pop, came back, and it was like, suddenly it was like, all these, Cornette was the agent for that, is the story, because Cornette, you know, Jim respects me now, and I respect Jim, but at that point in time, Jim did not he did not have a lot of time for old Brutus Magnus, right? and that's not a knock, you know. That's he was putting his time where he felt like it was valuable. It was not me. And I remember him coming, and I'm sure he must have looked at the format and been like, "What the fuck, Sting and fucking Brutus Magnus? Like, what the fuck, you know?" But you know, Jim puts a brave face on, comes and sits down, and he's like, all right. And he just looked at me and went, kid, keep your mouth shut and your ears open, and hopefully we'll be able to get through this without too many fuck ups. And like Steve kind of told him off. He kind of put him in, not harshly, but kind of went, actually, Jim, we've kind of worked this out, and I kind of like the way Nick wants to call the match. Like, he's like, Nick called the match to me that I really like, and I kind of want to do that. And Jim just sort of went, oh, well, all right then, you know. And it was kind of like, and again, I'm sure he probably walked away thinking, well, okay, it's your funeral kind of thing. Like, but once I was given this, because I had shit the bed a few times at TNA. There's no doubt about that.
Everyone does.
But it was like, it was always in these matches that I had no experience in, you know, like these sort of, you know, fast-paced spot fest kind of matches with you know, with great guys, which actually now I love having. I love doing like cat and mouse matches with guys like Saban and stuff like that. But at the time, it just was totally new, foreign to me, and I would shit the bed a lot. So this was the first. Now I was like, now it was in my wheelhouse. Like now I got to sort of cut a bit more of a sort of slower pace, a bit more walk and talk, a bit more kind of like yay boo kind of style, and just told this really simple, fun story with Sting. Had a good match, and then like I remember coming back from that, and Cornette was just like, holy shit, where's that been? You know, like, and Dutch tells like, hey, great. And then, and it was like all of the, well, I kind of had this light bulb moment, because it was all the guys that had drawn money who then came up to me and went, hey, good shit with Sting, you know, good match with Sting. Like, and that was where, you know, Kevin came in. Kevin came up to me and was just like, sorry, match with Steve, good shit. You know what you're doing. Like, from now on, you're going to, you know, from now on, you're with me. Like, and I was just kind of like,
awesome,
cool.
That's great. And you beat Sting at Bound for Glory, and then not long after this, they gave you the belt. You beat Jeff Hardy in that Dixieland match, but they gave you the belt and put the company on your shoulders. How does that feel?
It was, you know, 2013 was a good year for me. Like, it was, you know, it's a lot of momentum. I'd got myself in like crazy good shape. I just, you know, I'd really sort of started to really feel, first of all, I felt like I'd earned the respect of the locker room. And then I felt like I'd earned the respect of the audience. And I think that those two go hand in hand. Like, I think by the time we got to 2013, I'd been with the company 4 years, and I'd eaten a lot of shit, and I'd wrestled on every position in the card. You know what I mean? I'd been dark match, opening match, explosion, tags, you know, pointless like 8-man gauntlet, something, you know, whatever, nothing sort of match, everything, right? I'd been involved in, and I'd done it all with a smile on my face, you know, different. They broke up the tag team. They tried us for singles runs. They put me with Nigel. That was like on course.
I remember that.
Another great team. And then like, unfortunately, Nigel had to retire because he was diagnosed with hepatitis. But at the time, obviously, So it was like, I wouldn't say I was a casualty of that, but it was just, you know, at the time, because it was such a mystery, and everyone was like, wow, this team of like Magnus and Nigel McGuinness is going to be like, oh,
Yeah, I remember that.
you know, these guys have got, you know, we people to this day still go, man, London Brawling, man, that had such
That's
potential. Like we had like 2 matches, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it had a lot of false starts. You know, Bruce Pritchard had come in, and I think it's pretty obvious now, you know, that
We'll get
Bruce,
to that later on, believe me.
for whatever reason, has never really been a fan of mine, and that's okay, but not okay when he's got the pencil, and like, no matter what I did, I couldn't get him to, you know, give me a chance. So I ended up kind of just having like 2012, I'm just sort of like, you know, I get put in the team with Joe. And again, it's just
Jonas Brothers, we love that. The Jonas Brothers,
like,
that's what you was christened as.
yeah, but it's like, again, just you know, I got good at tag team wrestling, which is, you know, it's a totally separate skill set. You know, it's a different sort of art form, and some people really love it, and some are not. You know, I'm one of the people that love tag team wrestling. It's actually, you know, it's actually one of the things I miss the most, you know, about sort of my position now, is that I don't get to have a lot of tag matches. But Joe and I we just had that thing, you know, we just clicked, and it was like, again, that was like the final piece to give me that last bit of confidence. And I got the rub from Joe, and then I cut the promo in Wembley, the This Is England promo that sort of got this giant reaction. And it was like all these things just sort of kept adding to this thing, where eventually the locker room, and then the audience, you know, because we were, I mean, it was predominantly a very internet-based audience. You know, I would say that the TNA audience of 10 years ago was sort of indicative of what became the WWE audience today. Like, very, very heavily, you know, present on social media, very discerning, like very hard to please. And I sort of, baptism by fire, had sort of been through all that, you know what I mean? And I think that I'd got to this point where everybody went, you know what, this guy, he's taken our biggest shots and he's still standing. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the feeling I got from the audience. Is like, we've crucified this guy. I mean, we've kicked the shit out of this guy on every level, and he somehow just keeps coming back, and like, has, you know, now he's sort of earned our respect. And it was like, you could feel that because of Joe, and, you know, Joe did so much for me in that respect, because he made everybody go, no, like, those days are over. Like, you respect this guy now. And that's what led to the Mafia stuff. But yeah, to get to the point where I'd won, you know, where it was like, I don't want to overstate this, because obviously, you know, somebody will, you know, Bruce or whoever will just, you know, will just dispute it now. But in 2013, I am very, very confident that I could have gone to WWE. My contract came up, and I won't say who, but someone in the office at WWE had dinner with me, and I had emails that were just literally like, wow, you're a free agent, like, let's talk, kind of thing. Like, and it came down to the wire, and, you know, TNA, and Scott D'Amore was my agent at the time, and he negotiated me a nice deal with TNA, which at the time I opted for, because it was like, there are 2 reasons. One, because it was like a no-cut contract, so the money was guaranteed.
Yeah.
And like, my hotels were paid for, and they had to fly me, you know, business class. It was a really nice contract. And, you know, you become very aware of your sort of how fragile stuff is. So when it's like, they're basically saying, okay, no matter what happens, like, you'll get this, you know, you'll get paid for these years. I was kind of like, I was into that. And, but also because there was a little part of me, and this, you know, some of this came out in the wash when we were sort of negotiating, but I really felt like at this point, I was kind of like, I think if I keep my head down and keep plugging away at this year, I think I could be world champion.
Yeah.
Now, it's not like it really it didn't mean anything financially, because in TNA, obviously, you know, guaranteed contracts. It wasn't like, oh, I'd be the champion and then I'll make more money or anything. But it was just, for me, it was that point where I'd been the tag champion. You know, I'd been tag champions in Japan with Joe. Like, I'd been to Mexico, I'd been to India and won the world title in India, or with the Ring of King promotion. It was like I'd had all these things, you know, all these kind of sort of opportunities handed to me, and I'd smashed them all. And I was kind of like, I was looking at the landscape and I was going, well, he's been the champion like 3 times. He's been the champion 3 times. You know, like, you know, this, it's like, I think they might give it to me. You know, I think I might get it. And there was just, look, maybe it was me being a little bit of a mark, but I was also, it was like, there was part of me that was like, I want to fucking go all the way now.
Yeah.
And so when I got to the end of the year, but it's still like, I did the Bound for Glory series, and obviously the match with AJ in the finals of the Bound for Glory series, I think was like the final test.
Yeah.
Because I remember getting to that and thinking, oh God, because I was being pushed to the babyface, which I wasn't comfortable, you know, which was not my comfort zone at all. But I remember thinking, oh man, like, this isn't going to be good for me, because it's me and AJ in the finals. It's like a double babyface match.
Yeah.
I'm going to get building.
Everyone's only cheering on one person, TNA fans.
Right. And I didn't want to get that, because obviously at this point, you know, Cena's been a top guy for ages, and like, it's kind of like, so it's become that culture had been well established of like, oh, we're gonna rebel against like the pushed babyface guy. But we go to St. Louis, Harley country, and it's like 60-40. And I'm, you know, anyone, feel free to go back and watch it. It's like 60-40. You know, it's people by the bell rings for the finals is me and AJ, and like the atmosphere was electric. Like, people were like, and I don't think it was necessarily because, I think it was just more of this thing. I think the audience suddenly had this epiphany where they went, oh wow, like, we've seen it. This guy's become a somebody. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's our guy, and he's a TNA guy, and he's like, we're seeing him as like credible in this. You know, it was like, it's sort of like they took him by surprise, where they kind of went, well, I can't believe they actually went all the way, you know, and this guy's actually like, we see it, you know what I mean? And it was almost like, I get quite emotional talking about it, because it's like, I remember just having this moment, because I remember going out having this real sort of anxiety, thinking, oh man, I'm gonna, like, if they boo me, I'm like, this will be the end of my push, and like, I'll go back to just doing whatever. And I'd had all this momentum, and I remember just like people in the audience just being like, yes, do you know what I mean? Like, you're like, good shit, like, you know what I mean? And I lost that match, which was and again, that was perfect. That booking, Jeff Jarrett produced that whole segment, and he produced it beautifully. Because if I'd have won, everyone would have been like, oh, this guy's being pushed too much. AJ was the guy, clearly. I mean, and obviously what he's got. This is a funny story. I know I'm going all over the place, but I do have a point, I promise. But so when I was talking to that WWE executive, what AJ came up in conversation, because he was like, and he made some reference to, you know, AJ maybe, you know, having the chance to go and not going or something. And I said, well, AJ is the best in the business. And he kind of scoffed and was like, you know, because he wasn't in WWE, because he wasn't a WWE guy. And I was like, AJ is the best in the business, you know. And it's funny now to see, you know, to now, you know, fast forward. Now he's like, everyone, and now everyone at WWE, oh yes, AJ is the best in the business. I've always thought that, you know, and it's like, fuck off. Anyway. But you know, I had that match, and obviously it's pretty hard to have a bad match with AJ. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
But we told such an interesting story, you know, and the way that we did the finish, and this was all credit to Jeff on this, was the most important part of that whole match. Is AJ hits the spiral tap, 1, 2, 3. He's celebrating, and I just roll to the apron and sit on the apron and I'm not like stealing focus, but I'm just sitting there like looking out and like got a little bit of a tear.
Yeah.
And it was like real enough. And I have to say this too, Mike Tenay and Taz, absolutely. It was just one of those nights where everything fell into place. Everything was like done perfectly. I played my part perfectly. AJ, of course, played his part perfectly. The audience played their part perfectly in St. Louis. Mike Tenay and Taz did such a phenomenal call. And I remember the finish of that. Taz is like, just as the camera is cutting to me, Taz is like, no shame in losing like that. This kid busted his ass, and it was like, I remember watching it back and just going, oh my God, like we got this, we got this so perfect, because I remember Jeff going, trust me on this. This is going to be the thing, this is going to be your moment kind of thing. And I, not that I didn't believe him, but, it's like you develop this callous in wrestling where you sort of just go, okay, let's hope so. Like we'll do the best we can with, you know what I mean? Like, but you don't want to get your hopes up too much.
Yeah.
And then watch it back and go, because you get that sometimes, and it's not a knock on anyone in particular. It's just it's just hard sometimes for for everyone to get to everything to be timed perfectly and all the ingredients to be just there. But on that, I remember watching it back and just thinking to myself, this was a phenomenal piece of television. And I was, and I remember just coming out of that going like, I remember thinking, there's no way that I can go back to being like just another guy on the card now.
Yeah.
And that was what led to me, the match with Sting, where and again, here's another perfect example of what a great human being Steve Borden is. They build the whole thing with me and Sting like it's, student versus master, mentor. And it looks like all the pieces are in place for me to, to pass the torch, right? I'm going to beat Sting. We get to the pay-per-view that day, and it's Sting over with his finish, Sting over in the middle. And I go, okay, obviously I'm kind of like, I never got my hopes up about finish. And then Steve came up to me and went, did they just tell you the finish? And I go, yeah. And he's like, we're not doing that. He's like, this thing's the whole point of this whole thing's been set up for you to win, and that's what we're doing. And he's like, and by the way, I'm tapping out to the cloverleaf in the middle. And I just, I remember it was me, Sting, and Kurt at the table, and even Kurt just kind of looked like, whoa,
Yeah.
And Steve, God bless him, he went and told them and just was like, this, I'm doing that, I'm putting him over, like. And we came back, and that, they tinkered around with that a little bit. I didn't love, they sort of tried, they made it where I kind of disrespected him, and they wanted to sort of plant that seed for a heel turn. And I, again, look, I stated my case on it and said I thought that it was better to just leave that moment pure, but they did it the way they wanted. But either way, I came back, and I remember Sting just right in front of me looked at John Gaburik, who was running the company at the time with Dixie, and just looked at them both and pointed at me and went, right, now you have to make that mean something, which I knew what it meant. He meant like he needs to go all the way. Yeah, he needs to go all the way and win the title. So yeah, I mean, so it was like, it wasn't like I didn't see it coming, but it was still like, when I got there that day, it was kind of like, I remember thinking, like, Scott D'Amore came. As Scott, like I said, Scott was my agent, and he was a few other guys' agent. He was EY's agent and Sabin's, a few other guys. And I remember Scott came, and I was like, huh, what are you doing here? And he was just like, oh, I always come when it's a big night for my guys. And I was like, what? Like, he knew before I did, I mean, obviously he's like, he used to, he was part of the company, so it was like he's, and he is again now, but like he knew, he got the Iggy before I did, and he was like, oh yeah, tonight's your night, kid. Like, and I was just kind of like, oh cool. Look, I know that it's been well documented that after that it wasn't, didn't go ideally, but at the end of the day, I was the first British guy to do it. It was on cable
English
television
guy as well, and only English guy.
Cable TV, like primetime cable TV and like in front of a couple million people. Jeff Hardy, a huge star in our business and a great human being, and another guy who's made me look so good over the years, just, you know, sold for me. You know, it's like you know, you can't ask for more than that. Because for, you know, as a kid who you know, used to get up late to watch Jeff Hardy on pay-per-view, you know, to be able to, you know, to then be like beating him in a ladder match, like to, you know, to be world champion. And it's, you know, that, I mean, and I'll say as much as the politics and the sort of you know, some of the sort of the deteriorating of the relationships kind of happened after that, and as much as that got me down and really kind of scarred me for a while, I'll never change it, because I remember coming back to England around, you know, because it was Christmas, and the response from the British fans was just like overwhelming. I mean, like we did an event at the somewhere in London, I forget the name of the venue. It's like a music venue that we used to do a lot of like fan parties at, and the place, and it was like literally just a fan party just to celebrate me winning the title, basically. And like it was sold out, packed. And I remember just thinking like, this is ridiculous. You know what I mean? This is nuts. Like, because I'd sort of developed this, not a cynicism, but I was very aware of the cynicism of wrestling fans.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, it was so nice to have like these pure moments with the British TNA fans where they were just like, you're the man. This is unbelievable. Like they were, and you know, guys like Stu and Drew and Sheamus and stuff, you know, all these guys in WWE would like reaching out to me and going like, you fucking did it. You know what I mean? Like, this is great. You know, it's like, so, you know, I wouldn't change any of it.
No. And eventually you dropped the belt to Eric Young, which I had the pleasure of interviewing him 2 days ago. And so I had a great chat to him as well. And and one of the last, I know Bram, Thomas Latimer came into the company. You had that storyline though as well, which was great. But one of the last storylines he was involved in before you left TNA was with your wife Mickie and James Storm with Revolution. What was it like working a natural angle with Mickie, like on screen?
Well, I preferred the one we did with Tom, you know, with Bram.
Yeah, I love that one. I did.
Yeah, and you know, we all basically produced that one together. You know, Mickie wasn't with the company at that point, you know, and so, you know, and she was just coming off giving birth, you know, so, so like we I lost the title, and I've always been, you know, I've got no problem losing the title. You know, my only thing is like, okay, you have to have something good to move on to next. That's the most. If you lose the title and you don't do anything, that it's a career ender. Yeah. So I was kind of like, got no problem with you know, doing the favor for EY, you know, but I need to have some, whatever I'm doing next needs to be good. And Big says, well, we're bringing in your buddy, you know, and so obviously I was thrilled because like Tom's, you know, like a brother to me. So it was like, and when he said, this is all going to tie in because Tom's going to come in and basically be like, what happened to you? Like, you know, you blew it, you know, like, you know, what the, and I just right from the beginning, I was just like, that's a fucking great angle, you know, like, and then that's sort of where it started. And then they called and basically said, well, how do you feel about Mickie getting involved with it? And I just sort of said, well, tell me what you know, because I've been I have to preface this, but Bruce had tried to do something with Mickie and I back in the day, like 2011. And like Russo had tried to do something, but it was always just cheap. You know what I mean? Yeah. It was always like when Russo tried to do something, it was like so obviously just something he'd just come up with, like spur of the moment. Yeah. And I just remember going like, Vin, and this was me having self-awareness, this like the opposite of an ego, because I was like, she's a star and I'm not at this point. You know what I mean? This was, you know, 2010, 2011. I was like, if we do this angle now, I'm just forever, that's all I'm ever going to be known as.
Mickey's husband.
Well, not even husband at that point, his boyfriend. I'm like, that's it. That's going to be it from now on. You know, that's all, because I haven't had anything significant. So if this is the only, that's going to be the thing. Oh, he's that guy who's like dating Mickie. Do you know what I mean? So I basically shot it down. I mean, obviously, if they'd said no, we're doing it, and that's all there is to it. But you know, Mickie had enough stroke at that point to say no. So it was kind of like no, and then Bruce kind of hinted at it, was, well, you know, you and Mickie, maybe there's something there we can do. And I was just, again, I just kind of said the same thing. I was like, I'm not established enough.
No,
I need to be more established as an individual before we recognize that, because again, I don't want that to be what defines me as a performer and as a character. Like, and I stood my ground, and I was like, you know, a lot of people would have said, oh, great, you know, because they want to be on TV, and, you know, but I just said, I'd rather sit at home and wait for something else than to do that, because that would be a career killer. So when it finally, you know, so obviously they know at this point that I'm kind of reluctant. So then when they came to me this time, but it was different now. I've been world champion. I was, you know, company. So, and it made sense because it was Tom. So it was like, okay, there's a real betrayal there, because he's not just betraying me, he's also betraying her, you know, and then by not just betraying her, but, you know, being sort of, you know, threatening her and, you know, and being physical with her, it's like, that's real, you know, because to me, you have to have elements of reality.
Oh yeah.
You know, there has to be a kernel of truth for an angle to resonate, I think. You know, there has to be a, like, take Cody and I as an example. There has to be there's a genuine rivalry between us in certain ways that people sort of go, ooh, I think that's there's a little bit real there. And there is. You know, me and Cody aren't buddies, but like, we respect each other. Yeah. And we know that there's always, you know, we have that sort of gunslinger sort of understanding with each other. Like, hey, we know that when you and I get in a ring together, there's an anticipation, right? There's a sort of, there's a moment. And anyway, so with the Mickie thing, it was like, okay, these elements all work. And honestly, just from a practical standpoint, I mean, it's a business. You know, they were paying Mickie very, very well to come and do these one-offs. They were kind of like, when they sort of said, well, we'd pay her this per show, I was kind of like, oh damn, you know. And this is another part of the, you know, the needs to be, again, to give a bit of context. I had already made up my mind during my title run that I wasn't going to stay with the company. Like,
right.
And you can ask my buddies who I hung out with at that point. You know, I was telling them, when this contract expires, I'm done. Like, I'm not exploring another one. And they were like, shut up, like, you're the world champion, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like, and I was like, no, it's just, you know, I just kind of I was like, I've done everything I could do here now, and that's not a play. I didn't want to operate in that comfort zone anymore, you know. Now, obviously, if they'd turn around and said, you know, maybe some crazy money offer, that'd be different. But, you know, I just sort of said, at this point in time, I already knew. So knowing that, obviously, we also got a baby, and so when the opportunity's presenting itself, where in a short space of time, over the course of a few weeks, we could make like some pretty significant extra scratch on top of what I was already getting on my contract. That was another factor in the decision. We were just like, hey, look, it's gonna be a fun angle. You know, it'll be a good storyline. You know, people get invested. It'll definitely be like the semi-main event storyline, and we'll make a load of money doing it. And we did. So I had a great time doing that.
Cool. And like you said, you eventually left. It was a long stay with the company, but you eventually left, and Billy Hogan came along knocking, and NWA. So did he direct you call you personally, and basically he wanted you the face of the brand, or how did that come about?
Yeah, kind of. Things had not really gone that well after my TNA. You know, after I finished with TNA, I kind of thought I had at least earned an opportunity with WWE. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I was expecting them to roll out the red carpet or anything, but I felt like I had done enough to at least get a look.
Yeah,
you know,
I thought
and
so myself.
There's far too many people have said similarly at this point for me to think that there must be some other, there's something else, and obviously our good friend Brother Love at this point is, it's pretty obvious. Okay, but there was this sort of, I was kind of deflated because I was a bit like, man, I can't even get a fucking cup of coffee. Do you know what I mean? Like, geez. So, and the business is changing. Like, this was Bullet Club's sort of becoming, starting to get hot, and like, in a couple of years, it's like, it's not starting to get hot. It's the hottest thing in the business. Yeah. Suddenly, like, a very significant portion of the US fans are like really into New Japan. It's not just this sort of niche thing. It's becoming this bigger thing. And Ring of Honor is like cooking, and Cody steps away from WWE, and the whole sort of culture is changing. Like the Young Bucks, who are another act that like Bruce had just totally sort of squished and just kind of said, no, their shit, they ain't doing nothing. They've gone on to just build this empire for themselves. So it's like the whole landscape was sort of changed, you know what I mean? And I'm sort of looking at all of it, but I just felt like it had sort of moved on without me. So I was a bit like, and I got into a little bit of a funk for a while, because I was sort of going, like, I don't fit in here, I don't fit in there, all these different things are happening, and like none of it and it was after a while, like, I saw the success that Marty had by basically creating his own character. Instead of waiting for someone else to do it for him, he just goes, I'll just produce my own and just like create this whole character myself and present it and basically say it's open to whoever wants to book it and work with it. And he fundamentally changed the independent wrestling business. I really believe that.
Yeah, he did.
He changed the standard from how people market themselves. Like, it's not just like, oh, I put like a link to my YouTube, to a match I had on YouTube. Now it's like, produce a vignette. That's how Ricky Starks caught my eye for the NWA. And now look, because he produced his own vignette. And I went, anyone who does that, like, invest in themselves enough where that they're worth a chance. And so I went and started doing the same thing. I went and produced some of my own vignettes, and so then I started doing some stuff with Tommy Dreamer at House of Hardcore, and just started like reinventing myself and go, okay, like, Magnus is dead. Nick Aldis is the person you need to look at now, and this is a new, and you've got to get in on the ground floor. Just as I'm starting to feel like, okay, I can make something, I was starting to sort of plot out some steps. Okay, Dreamer and House of Hardcore is like a good place to start. This will help me sort of get some footing with some of the bigger independents, and then I can do this, and then I can get, then I maybe Ring of Honor, and this. And just as I'm sort of formulating this plan, Dave Lagana called me, and because I'd worked with Dave at TNA, and he basically went, "What are you doing? Like, why aren't you in WWE? Like, why don't I see you anywhere? Like, this is crazy, And I basically explained it, and he said, well, I left TNA with, to go with Billy. Billy bought the NWA, and this is what he wants to do with it. And starts kind of laying out his idea, his sort of vision for it. And I said, okay, well, that's something that I could get on board with, And I basically said, look, I'm not a boxing aficionado, but I just bought 2 boxing pay-per-views back to back. This was in the end of the summer of 2017.
Yeah.
Mayweather and McGregor, Canelo, Triple G, both marketed to me completely differently, but both equally effectively. And it made me focus on one fight, one rivalry, like one moment in time that you could not miss. I said, if we can attempt to do some stuff like that, then I'm on board, because I just started realizing, God, there's just so much wrestling, just so many wrestling matches happening all the time. How could anyone possibly care about any of them? I remember, for me, the idea of like, I want to get up, I'm going to set my alarm and get up late so I can watch this pay-per-view live, because I can't miss The Rock versus Triple H in an Iron Man match. Do you know what I mean? Like, I knew what other matches on the card, but that was the match. Do you know what I mean? That was the moment. Like, I had to see that. That was the main event. And I felt like that sort of, everything had sort of turned into like super cards. You know, it was just like this great wrestler against this great wrestler, and this great high flyer against this great high flyer, and this strong star guy is this strong star. It was all kind of like these epic dream matches, and I was just kind of like, that's all well and good, but you know, there's no like, there are very few matches that were making me go, well, this is the big showdown, this is the one. And I said, if we can try to do that, I think we can, you know, that's what I want to do. And I got off the phone with Dave, and immediately Billy called me like seconds later, and then he basically says, I'm picking up what you're putting down. And he starts kind of sort of laying out how he sees it, and he's like, I became fascinated with the business watching like Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher, and you know,
Yeah.
these guys. He's like, what happened to that? Like, what happened to like grown men like having, you know, athletic contests with each other and settling their differences? And I said, we can absolutely make that happen. And I think if you look at the NWA, you know, that is a pretty steady, that's a pretty common thread, is like most of our guys are grown ass men, you know?
Yeah, and he became NWA champion, defeating Tim Storm, who's carried the NWA on his back for many, many years, which we all love him for it, because he's a big part of where the NWA is now. And you had your big match at All In with Cody, which was a great match. And then you had the return at the 17th anniversary show, which you can actually see that on the NWA YouTube channel now. And you brought Camille into the picture as well. So how did that come about? Obviously, you won your title in that, you won your belt in that match, which, like I said, it was a great match. But Camille came into the picture, whose idea was for you to have your insurance policy, I suppose.
It was my idea to have a female bodyguard, you know, a female insurance policy. But Dave Lagana was the guy who suggested her for the role. The All In match, you know, a big part of that match was there was a moment where I had Cody dead to rights.
That's it, yeah.
Brandy throws herself on top as a human shield, and I nail Brandy with the elbow off the top. So it's kind of a, you know, Cody and Brandy have always had that sort of thing where they're kind of like, they're not really heels or baby faces, you know, they kind of
do what doing it these days.
They kind of do whatever's necessary to get the job done, which is sort of one of the things that makes him a compelling character, you know, like you don't, it's, I kind of look at Cody almost, and I guess I'm kind of similar in the sense as NWA champion, but it's like he's kind of sometimes more like a presidential, like it's like some people like him and some people don't, you know, it's like, but everyone kind of just accepts that he's, you know, in a certain position. So there's sort of some ambiguity there, but so, you know, when we're looking at the ways to make NWA 70 different, because remember, NWA 70 is our pay-per-view, so like we're making all the money this time, so it's, you know, the onus is on us to sell pay-per-views, and we set a box office record for that building, we, you know, and that's a pretty cool accomplishment considering that like how much wrestling has been in that building over the years in Nashville. But so we knew we were onto something, and then like the pay-per-view was very strong, but we started looking at it and going, okay, what this has to be the continuation of this saga from All In, and it has to be different. And so I said, well, 2 out of 3 falls, because there were moments in the Cody match where it's like, well, he could have been counted out, you know, DDP kind of interfered, you know, different stuff where it was kind of like there was some leeway from Earl Hebner, and this was all deliberate, you know, so that it then fed into the next one. And then I sort of said, you know, what would be really cool would be if, because Brandy we had that moment with Brandy in the first match, I was like, obviously, you know, in a perfect world we'd have Mickie, but obviously that couldn't happen.
No.
So I said, what if I had like a female bodyguard, like a China type? Because nobody wants to see me with a valet when they know that I'm married to like a Hall of Famer, you know what I mean? But the idea of a female bodyguard, I think people would be like, oh, you know, like they were sort of, I felt like people would understand that, and they did. So in describing sort of what I thought would be good, like one of the people I sort of had I used as an example was Alpha Female. you know, it's
Yeah.
sort of like somebody like that, you know what I mean? Like somebody who it's like, she's this big, impressive sort of woman. And it's like to neutralize Brandy. The whole point of it was to like neutralize Brandy and interfering. And I just remember just Lagana just being like, I know just the person. And he'd followed her, you know, because of she'd reached out. She was starting to get into the business, and she'd trained with the Dudleys and stuff like that. So it was kind of like one of those things where he'd seen like, man, she's got an incredible look, but you know, too green. And then it was like, she's perfect for this. And that was that, you know, and you just felt, again, it was just one of those things where right away you could just feel everybody in the audience just be like, oh, we're witnessing something here. Like this is, you know, we're on board with this. Like this is, you know, this is like high level stuff. And to me the 2 out of 3 falls match, the return match, this is like so much better than All In. It's such a better match.
Yeah, it is.
Like, you know, it was like, I know that so many more people saw All In, but I wish people would go and see that, you know, like you said, it's on YouTube. You can type, you can search it anytime, youtube.com/NWA. But I mean, that 2 out of 3 falls match, we put in some serious time, and just like, there's nothing I would change about that match. Like we just told such a great story, and just, and you know, and just even all the way to the finish, just like everything about that just was like, it just felt like an NWA title match.
Yeah. And eventually that led to the big return of NWA being the weekly show on YouTube and NWA Power. And not long after, your association with Camille and eventually developed into Strictly Business, which I absolutely love. You, Thomas Latmere, Royce Isaacs, Valentine, and Camille absolutely love the group. So I'm guessing that's your idea. That's your brainchild, definitely.
Yep, guilty. Yeah, just again, just sort of felt like a natural progression. Just was kind of like, as another thing that I had kept in. It was actually something that I had thought about, you know, with when we were coming up to All In, because obviously Cody was part of the Elite and everything, and I was kind of like. And then we had like the walkout teams. We had like the entourages and stuff. So, you know, Cody had like Dreamer and his father-in-law and different, you know, and whatever in his team. So then I remember like, okay, I need to have like a cool, but it was, you know, and I had Jeff and Davari and Sam, who wanted to be Dexter Loomis, and Tim. So it was kind of like, it was all just, but it was, you know, that was for the moment. But I had remembered at that time even saying like, maybe, you know, maybe after losing the title, maybe that's what makes me form a group, you know, just like just to protect my interest. It would, you know, it was a sort of logical step. But then when we started thinking about the rematch, it was like the female insurance policy thing was a better idea. So again, it's something I'd had in the back pocket, but again, it was just like, from a business standpoint, it was like, okay, people are enjoying this right now, so let's keep doing this, and then, you know, we'll keep that in the back pocket for when the time is right, to sort of keep it fresh and keep moving forward and do something that, you know, keeps it interesting, so nothing ever gets stale, you know. You should always change before you give something a chance to get stale, you know. And again, it was just me just looking at the lay of the land and the in the NWA with the roster that we'd put together. We'd put together this great roster of, especially of talkers, but they were mostly baby faces, and I'd become sort of a pseudo baby face just sort of by default, you know what I mean? Because I'd been like, because even though I never really acted like one, it was like people just sort of respected what I'd been able to do with the title and with the brand, and they kind of knew that like I was sort of doing more than just wrestling. I was sort of I was doing a lot to bring the brand back, and that means a lot to people here, especially in the South, you know. Like it's you know, it's to a lot of people in this country, the NWA is wrestling first. And so there was, you know, so I think at that point there was a sort of genuine kind of affection and sentiment for me. So I'd become a babyface. So then it's like, okay, I'm a babyface. You got Tim Storm, who's a great talker, and he's a huge babyface, super loved guy. You got Eli, who's a great talker, and he's like a babyface because he's so entertaining. You've got James Storm, who's like a baby face, and he's super entertaining on the mic. So I was like looking around and going, all right, it's time for me I need to be a heel. You know, like we need the bad guy again. Like I've got as much as I can out of being the sort of perennial Bret Hart type champion, you know, or even a sort of Dory Funk, Harley Race type champion, where it's like not necessarily a good or bad, but like you respect me and you want me, you kind of want the other guy to win. And I said, now I need to go just be full asshole, but everyone wants to beat me kind of thing. And that's why we used Tim. Tim was the perfect guy to do it with. And yeah, I mean, look, you saw the angle and how it all unfolded and everything. I don't have any problem saying it. I laid that whole thing out like top to bottom. At that point, I'd earned everyone's trust, with Billy and all the talent. I think at that point I sort of earned everyone's trust to like, okay, he's got as good a feel. He's not going, because it's like I hold this company and the future of this company in my hands, like it's mine.
Yeah.
So they know. So I think there's a trust there that they know that I'm not going to do anything to jeopardize the good of the company, because I've sort of invested so much of myself in it. So it's like I don't think there's a lot of concern that I'm acting in my own interest and not in the interest of the company. And anyone who would suggest that about me would just would just expose themselves to be ignorant at this point, because it's like I've done business when I needed to, and so with that, I was just like, well, it has to be Tim, it has to be I had a nice little swerve with the sort of setting up that maybe Camille was not my, because I said, oh, Camille's not my insurance policy anymore.
Yeah.
Night, so everyone, oh no, like she got fired. So then she's kind of a baby face, and just the whole thing just kind of worked, and then there's kind of again it was fresh. Now it's like a new thing to sort of keep building on and working on, because one of the things that sets us apart is that we don't change. The title doesn't change hands a lot.
No.
So it means something, but obviously it wouldn't be the same if I was still doing the exact same thing I've been doing when I started doing like the Oldest Crusade in 2017. It'd be but there's been a lot of progression since then, so it still sort of feels fresh. But no, man, I had so much fun with that, and just even down to like the jackets, and
love the jackets. I need a jacket.
They're going to be on sale soon on the store. You can pick up your own.
Really? Oh, definitely.
Business jacket. But it's like, I would be flattered when I saw other people kind of ripping off our stuff. I would see like different things happened on different, where I'd be like, oh, okay, I wonder where you got that idea from. And I was like, all that kind of thing did was like, it just gives us more and more confidence, because we're going like, look at this, like we're disrupting the industry, because like people are going like, people like a bunch of the writers at WWE that, I would never name names, because I don't want to get them fired, but like a bunch of them all say, like, we'll tell Mickie, like, oh, tell Nick, like we saw, like we love Power, like we saw the show, oh my god, like so great, like Edge is a huge fan of the show, like Adam texts me about the show and like about what we're doing, and he's been very, very complimentary of me, and said some things to me that I, again, like going back to guys I grew up idolizing and admiring, it's like he's said stuff to me that I can't believe. I'm like, is this real life? I can't believe he thinks this highly of me. But so it's like all those things do is just kind of just gives me more and more encouragement to just keep moving forward. And like every time you have a good idea, it's like, you're going to have a few stinkers, but it's like when you have a good one and it works, it's like it's just more and more momentum to come up with another one and keep building this thing.
And it was going really well, and you started the partnership with Ring of Honor with Marty coming over, which obviously, me being a British fan, seeing two of me favourites, clashing, it was great. Fortunately, COVID came about and put a halt on to everything, and there was people that were scared about the future of NWA, but thankfully, it looks like there's a new TV deal that's going to be in place with United Wrestling and Thunder Studios and NWA on Fight TV. So another show on the horizon, which we can't wait to see as well.
Yeah. So basically there's a weekly time slot that was made available by on demand pay-per-view, and then Fight basically decided that that they would collaborate as well, and so it became a sort of thing where Thunder Studios, obviously, like phenomenal facilities, so we can produce some really high quality stuff, because that's the thing, like, GPB was such a great spot, and it was and it was so perfect for us, but we just don't want to do anything in there without fans. Like, it's just, we just made that decision, like, we don't have to, because we're not getting a rights fee, we're not sort of contractually obligated to, we don't want to, like, it's just not going to feel the same with no fans.
No, it's not,
because they're such a big part of our show.
I love the fan interactions you have.
So we had to sort of, we sort of settled down a little bit, kind of took a step back, restructured some stuff. And then when this opportunity presented itself, we kind of went, okay, so, obviously weekly pay-per-views, kind of, the first thing you think of is like the old TNA stuff. So it's like not ideal. Like, it's not, no one's going to pay every week to see an episodic show. But the time slot is more of a pay-per-view time slot available to anyone who wants to kind of take part in it, right? So it's like, we look at it as every fourth or fifth week, that will be, we'll build to a big title match for on a pay-per-view at a lower price point. So we're kind of going back to a more of a sort of UFC prize fight type of approach, like we were doing before Power, where it's like, okay, here's the next sort of title match that we're building to, and here, and then we spend weeks kind of just telling you about that and just building up to it with with hype videos and packages and different and sit down stuff and talking heads and all the stuff that we really innovated in in a lot of ways. So that's really it. So it's just going to be, instead of because again, it sounds, on paper, it's a bit kind of like, weekly pay-per-views. It's not like we're going to have a weekly pay-per-view, No. We're going to be on there's a pay-per-view time slot available every week, and we will have it sometimes. And in the meantime, it gives us an opportunity to start shooting more original content for our YouTube, our Patreon. And, we've been so blessed to have a good, solid group of loyal, Patreon subscribers. And so that's the new model. And then like we're looking at opening an NWA facility, a training facility, and running a supplemental series based around that, and based around the people involved in that. So there's going to be a lot more content coming up. So for the time being, a wrestling company or wrestling promotion, who does not have a rights fee, doesn't have a television deal in place with a rights fee, they need to kind of, they all need to pivot and basically remodel as a digital brand. And that's kind of what we've done. So we're, for the time being, we're a digital content brand. And, it took us a minute to sort of get everything in place to make it happen. But that's because we didn't want to compromise our quality. We set the bar pretty high with, the level of stuff that we do. So I've always said that I wanted our brand to be like the HBO, of wrestling, the HBO boxing of wrestling, where it's like, you don't necessarily see it all the time, but when you do, you're like, oh, this is high quality. This is real restaurant quality stuff. I don't feel embarrassed watching this. I don't feel like this is a chore watching this. I want to watch this. Like, I want every single person watching the NWA to really want to be seeing it, not to be going like, oh, I suppose I should watch this. No, like, everyone who watches our show, like, really wants to see it.
Yeah, quality over quantity. So we've got a couple more subjects left, because I can see it's getting very dark in the background.
I know. That's what we've done here. Just, you've taken me all through the night.
So we've mentioned them a couple of times. It's the elephant in the room, Brother Love. So I listened word for word for what he said on his. He was doing the show on Slammiversary, but it was on about his return. I know he tried to spin it to say that he didn't think the Magnus character had it, but when Conrad Thompson confronted him about it and said, "Well, have you watched Nick Aldis in NWA?" He still said the same things, and he says, "Right, he's got a good look, he can wrestle good, but he hasn't got the it factor." So no disrespect to the wrestlers, what's on the brand, because they're talented, but Bruce Pritchard's head is up his own ass, because there's a lot of wrestlers over there. It's not fit to lace your boots, and that's no disrespect to them, but you're so talented, you've got the it factor, you carry yourself like a world champion. Is it a personal thing, or is it just he's in that WWE bubble? What do you all say he is?
I think it's probably a combination of the two.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I had a conversation with Bruce on the phone after he made those comments, and basically told him that I thought it was. I said to him, "You are absolutely entitled to your opinion about me and everything else, and we've had our differences professionally, but I just told him, I said, I'm calling to tell you man to man that I think it's really shitty for someone during the fucking pandemic, to basically, like, in your position of influence in the industry, I thought it's really shitty during a pandemic to sort of to harm someone's professional reputation like that." And Conrad, to his credit, he talked to me a little bit, and I don't believe there was any sort of malice on his part, but at the same time I was like, you guys, you had your team cut it and put it into a separate clip, and and put it up, and you used a current image of me with the NWA world title, and I worked really hard to reinvent myself after TNA, because I know a lot of that wasn't great. I was very green, I was very young, and I just said, like, I think Bruce formulated an opinion of me based on dealing with me in 2011.
A lot of times passed since then.
And and right, exactly. And the problem is with guys like him is that they, first of all, if you haven't been in WWE, like, you're nothing to them. Like, he treated everyone at TNA who had not been in WWE, he treated them like they were a jabroni, right? Wow. That's the fact. He treated everybody. I mean, he just very condescending and patronizing, and I did my best to sort of, to really impress him and work through it, and earn his. But it's just like, it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to happen, because in his mind, he was so ashamed and embarrassed of working at TNA. Like, and that in turn pissed a lot of us off, because we were like, you don't have to keep reminding us, like, that you're slumming it here in TNA. You know what I mean? Like, you need the job, dude. Like, stop. It's not WWE. It's not a third generation multinational, like, multi-generational company with hundreds of millions or billions of dollars at this point. No, it's not that. It's a company that started in 2002. Right? Like, get a fucking grip. Right? It's like you get that, this isn't very good. Or in WWE, it's like this. Okay, well, you get these guys who used to work at Google, and then they go and start their own, like, tech startup. Do you think they spend the whole time going like, oh, well, at Google, we did this? No, you're working for a startup now. You're working for a younger company, a newer, younger company. Like, and it was just like, that mentality just was so destructive, and just was, was so just kind of killed morale with the boys. And then, like, I think that with him, the real kicker, the real thing with him is that when like I was talking about before, my contract was coming up, he offered me a contract that was, it wasn't what I would call a slap in the face,
No, but not as good
But
as what you
no, it wasn't
expected.
as good. But more importantly, he wanted me to sign for the same money for 3 years.
Right.
My argument to that and my rationale for that was I think I was 25 at the time. I said, if you think that I'm still going to be worth the same amount of money in 3 years from now as I am today, then why the fuck would you want me?
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, this is the same argument that Triple H made to Bischoff in WCW before he left. Was he's
Yeah,
like,
exact one. Yeah.
like, you're telling me that that you think I'm going to be worth the same amount of money? That's where this whole thing came from, because he basically went, well, that's good money for a guy your age. And I said, yeah, it is good money for a guy my age, but that's not as good for a guy at 28.
No.
And I said, it's not just about the money. It's about my value. You're telling me that I'm going to be worth the same amount of money
Yeah.
in 3 years. So what does that say about you? What does that say about me? What does that say about all of this? Right. And I had a relationship with Dixie because I'd already been working there for like 2 or 3 years before Bruce got there. And so I just went directly to Dixie and said, if you think I'm going to be worth the same amount of money 3 years from now as I am today, then there's no point me staying here and I may as well just go. And she was just like, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you talking about? What do you mean? What's going on? What's happening? And I said, this is fucking contract,
Yeah.
And it's like, I think that it's just double standard, right? Because
Oh yeah, definitely.
Bruce would, I've heard Bruce talk about this, guys, if they want to be top guys, they need to get a relationship with Vince. They need to go march into Vince's office and go straight to the boss and tell them and tell them their problem and hash it out, right? Which is exactly what I did. I went to him, and then I went to Dixie, who's the actual boss, because Bruce wasn't the boss, and that's the thing that really has stuck up his ass for most of his life, right? That he wanted to be like the head, the big kahuna, and he wasn't. I went to the genuine boss and basically made that argument and said, if you think I'm going to be worth the same amount of money 3 years from now as I am today, then I may as well get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
And so then after that, basically she took Bruce off the case. She basically said her attorney then dealt with my agent, being Scott D'Amore, and they negotiated my contract. And Bruce was basically removed from the equation. And he didn't like it. And I can understand from his point of view. He's probably like, oh, this punk kid who's never done shit, he's 25 and he like, and I remember he said he said this to me on the phone. You're getting some scoops here. He said to me on the phone, you're just being a little bitch and running to your mummy. Right? Said that about the president of the company, who was a woman.
Yeah.
And I was like, no. I said, I went directly to the president of the company. That's not the same thing. But he was like, I just think that's being a little bitch running to your mummy when you don't get your own way. And I was like,
you asshole.
Misogynist way of looking at it, but okay. And and that, like, so now you understand the context of like why he was never, after that, he was never going to look at my stuff objectively.
Yeah.
No matter what anyone says to him, no matter how much positive stuff he sees, no matter how many people endorse me, Harley Race, Dory Funk Jr., Ric Flair, it doesn't matter. Edge, Mark Henry, like Hall of Fame, it doesn't matter who's going to tell him like that he's really found himself, like this guy's like he's one of the best in the industry. To him, he's written me off based on that exchange in 2013. Punk kid thinks he's better than he is. He even tried to like he tried to say once that I like compared myself to Stone Cold, which I didn't at all. Never. No. Like no one would do that. Like this is, I mean, he's just one of those guys who tries to twist the narratives to make himself right, and he just he did that, and I've just always felt like, and what's funny is that, like, when he was down and out, when he had no job anywhere and was like just doing his podcast stuff. Oh, suddenly then he's like following me on Twitter, and he's like, saying hi to me at conventions, and and this and that, and then he goes back, and suddenly it's like, he doesn't have it, he's not there,
Yeah.
And look, I don't know why he felt the need to do that. Maybe my name came up in a meeting. I don't know. Maybe he was just like, but ultimately now you understand the context. So I didn't need. The one thing in this whole, I don't like getting involved in that kind of stuff, right? No. I don't want to be controversial and doing all this shit, but I had no choice on that. And I even talked out of respect. I talked to some of the Hall of Famers and stuff like that who would put me over and said, look, I don't want to have to do this, but I'm going to have to address this because, he's fucking with my livelihood. And they all said the same thing. Went, yep, do it. You know what I mean? They said, yeah, that's fucking uncalled for. You need to do that. And the thing about it is, I didn't, in any part of my response to this, I never once said, I do have the it factor. I am great. Like, I am awesome.
Yeah.
I let other people say that.
Yeah.
Like, you feel that way about me, then if you feel I don't, then that's up to you, man. But I'm confident in the fact that there are plenty of other people who feel differently, and that's the business now. The times have changed, So don't think I'm going to be on his Christmas card list anytime soon. But
no.
my whole I'll say this and I'll put it to bed. He started it.
Oh yeah.
In no way, shape, or form had any intention or desire to ever air any of that stuff I just talked about because it's just business.
Yeah.
Everyone has contract negotiations that go away. That's why it's a really fucking bad idea to have the person who books the show and does the creative for the show also be the guy who does contracts and stuff.
Sure.
Because you develop this, because then you get sour, because then when you have a contract negotiation that doesn't go well or has it has some like animosity, which they often do, because obviously it's like it's a negotiations, it's a battle, it's a fight. It can leave a sour taste in your mouth, and then a lot of the time it leads to people being vindictive and spiteful, and doesn't do what's best for business. And I think that's the type of person he is. I think that's been evidenced, because to your point, Cornette said this, several people said this in the response to this, was they went, you're really going to say that about him with that roster?
Yeah.
And look, obviously I've got a conflict of interest here, right? My wife's a future Hall of Famer, one of the greatest female performers of all time. And I've got there's a lot of guys in that company I have a great deal of respect for. But at this point in time, I'm very confident that on the open market, I would smoke a great deal of them on
Easily.
The mic, the ring,
Easily.
In terms of return on investment, everything.
Yeah.
Those guys they're probably making more money than me because they're being generously paid by the folks at WWE. But if they came on the open market, they wouldn't do the business I do. And that's it's not very easy to quantify, right? It's a subjective statement, but I'm pretty fucking confident that I'm right.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I said, I'm not being biased for you because you're a fellow countryman, maybe, but I'm not. I'm judging it as me, as a wrestling fan who's been watching it. I'm born in '89. I've been watching it since '94, for example. So I've been watching wrestling for like 26 years. If I look at all the company champions, obviously I love McIntyre. Okay, it's about time they put the fucking belt on him because I've been crying out for it for years. But besides McIntyre, I can't name a better world champion than yourself. Not just a world champion, an actual wrestler who can actually deliver on the mic, who's got a great character, who carries himself like a champion, looks like a champion. But it's WWE, they're in the bubble, and that's it. But we'll lighten the mood with a couple of quick questions, and I don't want to leave on a sour note.
No.
One of the questions I wanted to ask, these guys, like I said earlier, I love them. Portray, so say scenario, you're in a bar, it's yourself, Tom Latimer, Eli Drake, James Storm. Who's the last man standing after a few rounds of booze?
Well, it's a bit of so I have to qualify this, but Tom doesn't drink anymore. He's teetotal. You know, Tom is he's just one of those guys who, unfortunately, he just can't, like, once he has one, it's like, it's kind of, you know, he just doesn't do well. He's Jekyll and Hyde, man, and he's, you know, and he's paid the price for it a few times, and like, but anyone who knows him will tell you that he's just the most, you know, the most kind-hearted, good-natured.
I would love to speak to him one day.
Best guy. I mean, just like, he was the best man at my wedding. He's my best friend. He's like a brother to me. You know, doesn't have a malicious bone in his body. Just unfortunately, alcohol for whatever reason just does something to his chemistry, right? So he does it. So he's absolutely teetotal. You know, doesn't touch it. Yeah. You know. So, however, back in the day, I mean, he would. We can laugh about it now because he's come out the other side of it a better person. But I mean, there would be times where he was, like I say, Jekyll and Hyde, and that is accurate because, like, you just couldn't stop him. You know, he was like uncontrollable, like he was like a machine. But I would say, just in the sort of traditional sense, it would be probably Cowboy or myself.
Cowboy, yeah.
Me and Cowboy have put away, you know, a lot of booze in a lot of different countries, and so I would say that we're probably around, like, you know, typically when you find sort of guys that you can drink with, and it's like you kind of have to have you have to have similar levels of stamina a lot of the time. Yeah. So I'd say that we're both around the same. We're both pretty close in that regard. But yeah, it's probably a push. I'd probably say Cowboy on me. Yeah.
Cowboy. And two more questions because it's getting late. Who's the funniest guy backstage or girl? I've got a feeling it's Drake, but I might be wrong.
No, you know, you'd be actually Eli's kind of quiet.
Really?
Eli kind of like backstage. He kind of keeps to himself. Eddie Kingston's like, he's a big personality in the locker room, big personality backstage. Funniest, I would probably say, in the NWA dressing room. I'm trying to think during like Power and stuff. I would say probably Ricky Morton.
Yeah.
Aaron Stevens. Who else? They're the two that spring to mind. Pope. Like,
yeah.
And then from the girls, Thunder Rosa is she's a big character backstage.
Yeah, she came across like that when we spoke.
Yeah, she's a big character. Like, she's a very you know, very, very outspoken. And like Melina, Marty Bell. Yeah.
Yep.
All the Latinas.
Very Latinas. And the last one, how excited is your little boy that he's going to be able to play as you in the new Retromania game?
I don't know if Retromania game. He's not quite evolved yet to video. Oh, actually, that's not true. He does play. He has started playing a couple of monster truck games on like the iPad and stuff.
Yeah.
But for the most part, he's still more into the toys. Like, I think the action figure is going to be more interesting to him. I mean, obviously, I've had a couple of action figures before. Obviously, Mickey's had several. So like, he sort of understands that, oh, it's a daddy doll and a mummy doll. So it's like, I remember having this conversation with Sting because he said his kids said the same thing. Like, it was only way later in life that they kind of realized, like, oh, not everyone's parents have their own action figure, you know? Like, because it's like, Donovan's never really been that excited about it. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, it's daddy doll, you know what I mean? But I'm thinking when the new one comes out, when the new retro style one, the Hasbro style one comes out, which you can
just seen it, yeah.
You can pre-order at chelatoys.net in the UK or at oh gosh, I'm gonna get killed. I've forgotten the URL for the American site. bodyslamclothingclub.com. bodyslamclothingclub.com. You can pre-order the retro Hasbro style figure in the US and Canada. But I think he'll be more excited when he sees that, because it's kind of more like, Well, plus it'll be, because it'll be a big thing when it comes, because like we obviously that have worked really closely with that company. They're a brand new company, and I'm literally their first licensed toy. So that's a cool feeling, and the response has been superb. So like everyone's really happy about how it's going, and so I think we're genuinely happy. We're all genuinely excited to when that first one comes, and I'll get a bunch. And so I think that one will be exciting because it will feel like a new thing, because the other figures, they came out before he was born. So I think he's just sort of always known. But then when this one comes and it's new and it's like, that's daddy, like I think that one will be exciting for him.
Cool. Well, Nick, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Do you want to plug your social media before we go? Tell everyone where they can find you.
On Twitter at Real Nick Aldis, and then and that's the same for my official Facebook page. And then on Instagram, I'm at Nick Aldis. I'm verified on them, so you can look for the little blue tick. And nickaldis.com, and that will take you to my sort of landing page. It can also take you to the page for my book, Superstar Body Book, and you can order merch and order a copy of the book. I'll even do a custom 90-day training and diet plan for you for $99. Had some great success with that. I've been retweeting a lot of guys who have had some real good success with that. That's a nice little side hustle for me that I enjoy doing. I really just do it because I enjoy it. I don't really do it for the money, but it's had some incredible success stories. Guy in Canada called Adam has lost like 40 pounds, I think, already. And then
Wow.
I just retweeted a guy earlier called Derek in Tennessee, he's dropped like 30 pounds, I think, in a couple of months. So it's a nice rewarding thing. So it's all of that you can find me there and reach out to me, and I will usually respond at some point.
That sounds about a good spot. But thanks again, Nick. Absolute pleasure to come on. I've actually skipped early questions, so hopefully we can do it again one day. And if Tom or Royce wants to come on the show, I'd love to have them on. And even Mickie, I'd love to speak to Mickie one day, or if the two of you want to come on the show together if you have free time, we'd absolutely love to do it.
All right, cool, man.
All right, thanks again, Nick, and hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, have a good night.
All right, bye.